for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. Craig Wessels started his own media company after dropping out of university, but he'd always wanted to be a farmer. After a 3-day winemaking course in Stellenbosch, he decided to give it a go when he and his wife Anne bought a property in the Upper Hemel-en-Aarde Valley in 2004. Entirely self-taught, he's since turned Restless River into one of the finest estates in South Africa, famous for Pinot Noir, Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon. Hello, Craig, and welcome to the podcast.
Good evening, Tim, and thanks for having me.
And joining us from the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, or the Upper Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, aren't you?
Correct. I'm in the Upper Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, which is the appellation in the middle of the valley.
Yeah, and you're a very happy man at the moment. I mean, what a vintage. Everybody's saying this is the greatest vintage they've seen in a long time. Is that right?
I think so. We've been farming here since 2004, so 21 years, and definitely the best vintage that I've experienced so far.
How exciting. That's really good news, isn't it? Let's talk about you and your beginnings, which are not in the Cape, let alone the Upper Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, but in Durban, in KwaZulu-Natal. And
Yes.
Your dad was a vet, I think, and so was your grandfather. Your mum was a nursing sister. Did you consider going into medicine either for pets or for animals or for human beings or not?
Well, on weekends I used to watch him operate in his surgery. Sometimes I'd get my hands inside the animals myself. It was quite a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And for a while, I thought, I've got a grandfather and a father. It's quite a good line going. Maybe I should continue this line. But that thought didn't last too long. It didn't take me a lot of time to figure out I wasn't much of an academic.
And you need to be a vet, right? Don't you?
Yes, of course. It's a very difficult doctorate to achieve. So I think you need to be able to sit down and stare at books endlessly.
Yeah.
And that's just not really my forte.
I mean, you're a bit more of a doer, maybe. Do you think you're somebody who learns by doing stuff?
I think so. If I look back and I follow the way I've done things, I'm pretty much self-taught through everything that I've done, even, not just on a work side, but even on a hobby side. I can close my eyes and strip an engine and rebuild it. That's taught myself.
I must say that. I mean, that's a skill. I couldn't do that. When you were growing up in KZN, were there any vineyards nearby? I mean, there are some now, aren't there?
Oh, now there are, of course. But back then, when I was growing up, it was a foreign concept. The closest vineyard was an air ticket and 2 bus stops away. So it was a hell of a long haul to go see a vineyard. So it didn't really enter our minds back then. Yeah. But now there are a couple of vineyards in the Natal, the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands, probably about an hour and a half drive from the coast, from Durban.
Were there any farmers in your family, or were they all vets?
No. Well, we come from a long line of the Afrikaans side of my family, the Wessels side. We come from a long line of farmers, like most Afrikaners in South Africa. So it's in my blood, has been. Actually, once we purchased Restless River, we found out that the Wessels family had first owned the Hemel-en-Aarde farm. The entire valley was one farm back then. They were the first European settlers actually in the Hemel-en-Aarde in 1760. So we go back quite a long way, and it's quite ironic that 250 years later we bought a portion of that farm.
I mean, what a coincidence that your family owned the entire valley at one point.
Yeah. At one point, we had the valley wrapped up. We had De Mont, which is a beautiful holiday home at the mouth of the Klein River in Hermanus. That was one of the Klute, our other half of the family, their holiday home. In fact, we actually once owned Constantia, Cork Constantia, the farm with the Klutes. So we do go back quite a long way, and it always seems to head in the direction of booze, or at least vineyards.
And your dad was a wine drinker, was he? Quite a keen wine drinker.
Yeah. Durban had a very staunch wine club, the Durban Wine Society, and I can recall they met every the first Wednesday of every month, and he would be off with his 6 ISO glasses, his Platter's Guide, and a corkscrew and a couple of notes. And he'd come back with a really big grin on his face.
And you said you weren't very academic. You dropped out of university in your final year. What were you studying?
Well, I first started to study graphic design, and then I got called up. Back in those days, we had military service. So while I was studying graphic design, I got called up to the Navy and decided to go and get it over with. And while I was in the Navy, I changed my mind and ended up going to university to study a Bachelor of Commerce, thinking that I would specialize in marketing. And yeah, like you said, I got into my final year. I think I only had 2 credits to go, but I decided I'd had enough.
and you grew your hair, bought a Harley Davidson. Sounds like a midlife crisis in your early 20s. And you started riding with the Hells Angels. I mean, what did your parents think? They thought, Christ.
Well, it was a pretty wild period. But my parents had their hands full anyway with my older brother. So I could sort of fly under their radar and carry on with my own sort of skullduggery.
Did he did something worse than joining the Hells Angels, did he, or not?
Oh yeah, yeah. We grew up quite liberal with quite social parents, and they, we grew up around a lot of sunshine, being in Durban. A lot of people around the house all the time. Braais, a lot of beer and wine, a lot of cigarettes. A lot of vinyl records being played. So we tended to be a bit more liberal there on the East Coast than our brothers in the North or down in the Cape.
And are your parents still alive or not?
No, they've both moved on.
Ah, that's sad. But they got to see your success, right, in the wine industry.
Yes, I mean, very fortunately, yeah. And I think they initially were quite amazed, and then I think by the time they moved on, the farm was pretty well set up. The brand was established. We were quite busy in the wine industry, and my dad had always wanted to farm, never quite made it into farming, so he could live semi-vicariously through me, I guess. At that stage, it was
that's
great.
a nice thing.
Yeah.
In '94, you moved to the Cape full time. Presumably, you'd sold off the motorbike and left the Hells Angels. You went into advertising. How did you get up into advertising?
Well, when you're young and impressionable, we had a session at when I was at high school, sort of towards the end of high school, where they would get parents in to come and talk about different vocations and try and help you decide on a career path. And I can just remember a lot of the parents coming in and talking about business, accounting, and a lot of desk office-based jobs. And then one parent came in and he started showing TV commercials. And these commercials were, back in the day in South Africa, legendary. These Peter Stuyvesant commercials, your international passport to smoking pleasure, as well as Cane Spirits, which was called Mainstay. So that was these beautiful TV commercials that sold this incredible lifestyle of girls in bikinis and turquoise oceans and yachts and and booze and cigarettes, and it was just fantastic. And I thought, holy moly, this is for me, man. This is what I want to do. I want some of that. So I thought if I was going to go and work, that's something that would be something I would pursue. So I ended up working for 2 great ad agencies in Cape Town, but for a very short period of time.
Had you met Anne, your wife, by then or not? Who was to become your wife?
Yes, by then I'd met her. It was probably one of the decisions why I needed to tone it down with the motorcycles and the and that rebellious behavior, and start to get a job and start working. And if I was going to do something, I felt that was something I could probably do. Advertising, I always said, employs the unemployable. So
I like that. I mean, you went to the States for a bit, didn't you, with Anne? And Anne was, a very famous supermodel. I mean, lots of people say, hey, we know Anne, and so you were in the States for a year with her, and then you came back to South Africa and you set up your own media company. I mean, what did that do? Something different from advertising, presumably? Yeah,
so I mean, a couple of things fell into place there. While I was working in advertising, I got exposed to a lot of the creative side and the production side, Anne and I went and lived in the States for a year. She was working. I studied. I decided to study in that line of computer-generated imagery. So basically digital, generating everything on a computer, which back in those days was relatively unheard of, especially for smaller independents. Anyway, I studied that, and then in '97 I started a company producing digital content and supplying as supplier to the ad industry initially, but also to the broadcasters. So we ended up creating TV commercials, doing a lot of 3D animation, a lot of motion design, and also branding and imaging for broadcasters and TV channels. So it grew quite quickly because we were right at the forefront of that digital wave in the late 90s.
And did that give you enough money to buy your first farm? Because you bought a farm in 1999, didn't you, in Tesselasdal, not too far from where you are now, right?
Yeah, so Tesselasdal, 1999 was relatively unknown, but I'd been traveling and riding quite a bit on the bikes, and I'd come across this little town, village really, and there was relatively inexpensive farmland all around. And I had this burning itch always since a child to farm, but needed at that time to get out of Cape Town. We were living quite a fast-paced lifestyle, and bought this small farm out near Tesselasdal, and spent a couple of years developing it.
And you did a winemaking course, didn't you, at Stellenbosch University, 3 days, and then planted a hectare of Cabernet? Right.
It sounds amazing. I could say, yeah, I did a winemaking course. I graduated at Stellenbosch University. I could just stop right there. However, it was a 3-day garagiste course, 2002, I think it was. A mate of mine, Charlie Crowther, who farms up the valley, we were both quite into wine together, and he dragged me along on this course. Thank God he did, because for a Durban boy, it really opened my eyes into a whole world that I knew very little about, apart from drinking it, of course.
Well, I mean, were you starting to think this could be a future for me at some point, or you were still very involved with your day job? Weren't you?
At that stage, not at all. My business was young, my family was very young, so I was very focused on building that business and busy in that career. However, It was, like I said earlier, it was a sort of this itch that just wouldn't go away. But I used to go out there every weekend, every holiday, as often as possible. But at that stage, I hadn't really thought about getting into the wine industry. I knew very little about it.
But in 2004, so 5 years later after this first farm, you bought Restless River, which is where you are now, Upper Hemel-en-Aarde Valley. I mean, how did you hear about that place? I mean, was it the family connection from before, way back in the midst of time?
No, I wish it was as romantic as that, but I was really starting to think that I needed to switch the way I was living around, where I was commuting out to the farm on the weekends and working all week. And I thought, by then I had a 1-year-old Ava and a 4-year-old Luke. We were living in Cape Town. I needed space. I wanted my kids to grow up with space. So I was starting to think it would be a good idea to reverse the way we were living and actually live out this side. And then I could alone just commute to Cape Town, Johannesburg, overseas, wherever I needed to be for work. And I was driving from the Tesselasdal farm, which is about 40 kilometers from the town of Hermanus. I was driving to Hermanus, and then there was this farm for sale. And I popped in. It was a Sunday. I popped in. It was really rough, really, really rough. I didn't actually know too much about what I was looking at, but I bought it on the Monday morning.
And it was planted with Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon, of all things. And you'd already planted a hectare of Cabernet Sauvignon at Tesselasdal, right? Okay, so it was the Cabernet link maybe that tempted you, was it?
Not at all. The Tesselasdal planting of Cabernet was just, I really needed to experience at that time, 2003, what it was like to plant vineyards. I didn't really have a plan for them. And there were no vineyards in that area either. So it was quite a pioneering thing, actually. But 2004, when we purchased Restless River, the name of this farm, incidentally, is Klein Hemel, which means little heaven. Restless River is what we've called the wine. But we purchased this farm, Klein Hemel, with about 4 hectares on it of vineyards. It was really just a bonus. Whether it had the vineyards on it or not, I still would have bought it. But it, for some reason, still don't know to this day, but the previous owner had planted Cabernet, in a valley that was about to take off with Pinot Noir. But fortunately, it also planted Chardonnay. I guess in my mind, I keep thinking perhaps he was influenced by Napa or maybe Margaret River, where Cabernet and Chardonnay do well side by side. I never really got to ask him.
He didn't plant Pinot Noir, right?
Not initially. I first planted Pinot in 2013, so that was 12 years ago, and that forms the basis of our single vineyard, Le Luc, which is a beautiful vineyard now that it's 12 years old, and I'm assuming it would get better and better over time.
And you launched Restless River as a brand in 2012 with the Cabernet, which is the Main Road and Dignity 2008, 2010 Ava Marie. So what were you doing between 2005 when you bought the property, 2008 when you made that first wine? Were you learning how to make wine?
Yeah, so I did my first vintage, which very few people actually know. I did my first vintage in 2005. So this year is actually my 21st vintage. A lot of people think I'm still new to this game, but I just I fly a little bit under the radar, keep low, keep quiet, get on with it. But since 2005, I've been making wine. Those initial years that you asked me about, 2005 till 2008, I guess I could call it my learning years, where I was trying to figure stuff out. It was actually the wine. I've still got those wines from 2005, and they're drinking quite well. But I didn't have the confidence in those days with my abilities that I thought I could put this out in the public domain. But once we got to those later vintages, 2008, I was feeling like, wow, these wines are actually pretty good.
This is good.
And then I also, we only launched them in 2012, which might be part of your question, because a lot of the wines that I liked were from areas that kept their wines back a bit before release. So, if you look at the old classic Bordeaux, Burgundy, Riojas, some of the Loire, Piedmont, those are the wines that I love to drink. And one thing that really stood out about these wines was they were not released the next year after they'd been harvested. The guys actually exercised a bit of patience. The wines were matured properly and then released. So I decided I was going to do a similar thing, which worked for us with hindsight, because our wines are actually more approachable after a little bit of time. I don't tend to make wines that are instantly gratifying. They do require a little bit of time in bottle.
I think that's true. And I mean, who were your mentors and inspirations? Was there anybody, or were you just doing it on your own? I mean, you often say to me, you're a bit of an introvert and a loner. Yeah. Was it just you sort of sitting in the cellar trying to work it out, like taking an engine apart?
Yeah. I was like a mad scientist, I guess. Yeah. I spent countless hours in the vineyards and in my first winery. But to put it into context, my first winery was a garden shed for 2 years. I spent a lot of time in a garden shed, which wasn't ideal as a winery, but nevertheless, you make, what you've got, you make it work. But I spent time figuring stuff out. And, because I hadn't studied wine, I didn't really have any boundaries or constraints or preconceived notions. I went with intuition and gut feel and using my senses and felt my way through the process, which I think in the long run has actually worked for us.
Yeah, I think that's true. Tell us a little bit about the Hemel-en-Aarde and its 3 sub-regions. It's quite a small region, isn't it? Just briefly tell us where it is and what the climate's like and the soils and which varieties it's best suited to for people who've not been there.
Yeah, so Hemel-en-Aarde on a macro level is about 100 kilometers southeast of Cape Town. So it's further south, so it's cooler naturally on the latitude that's a bit further south. Then zooming in a bit, it's just behind the town of Hermanus. The valley itself is a very narrow valley, a short valley, probably 15 kilometers long, with very tall mountains on either side, a stunningly beautiful valley, extremely picturesque, very natural looking, unspoilt in many ways. And I think the key for the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley is its extremely cool growing climate, where we're able to work with cultivars that appreciate a cooler growing season. And then within the Hemel-en-Aarde are 3 appellations, which initially I think we were poo-pooed a bit for creating, but over time I think it was a good thing. We do have 3 very distinct terroir zones, and those were demarcated. And I think over time, those 3 areas are starting to show themselves more and more as 3 individual areas, which has been great.
And in soil terms, I mean, Bockerfeld Shale obviously down the bottom end. What about in the middle where you are?
Yeah, so the 2, I mentioned it in the beginning of the podcast. We're in the middle appellation, the Upper Hemel-en-Aarde. To the what would it be? To the west is the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, which is at a lower altitude, and then to the east is the Hemel-en-Aarde Ridge, which was a later appellation, an appellation that came a bit later. It's a little bit drier out that side, I would say. So our soil types on the 2 appellations on either side of us are Bockerfeld shales, and then on the Upper Hemel-en-Aarde, it's predominantly granite-based, decomposed granites, ancient decomposed granites, but with a heavy clay content. So quite differently to some areas, say of the Paardeberg and the Swartland, which is more sandy with less clay. We have a very high clay content.
Interesting. I mean, you've talked about your winemaking and the way you learned to do it yourself, but I also think of you as a vigneron, you know, that French word. In other words, you're someone who spends as much time in the vineyard as you do in the cellar, and you said you'd always wanted to farm. I mean, what's your approach to farming? I mean, are you organic, are you biodynamic, are you, sustainable, are you doing anything else that we should know about?
First of all, thanks. The term vigneron, it's a beautiful word. I almost feel privileged to be called that. But yes, it all started in the vineyards. A lot of guys will start their careers in wine from the wineries, from the winery side, making wine. I started it the other way around. We bought vineyards. I didn't know how to make wine, so I had the vineyards first. So the vineyards are really, really key. As anyone who's very into wine quickly finds out, that great wine is made in the vineyard. So the moment that triggers, you realize how important your vineyards are. But I just initially, even before that, just loved the outdoors, loved being in the vines, loved walking the vines, liked the peace, the quiet, liked being alone, and just observing what was going on. From a farming point of view, it's actually really, really simple, from my point of view anyway. We made a huge commitment to focus on planting vines so that we could make wines from our own vineyards. And that is a very big commitment to make as opposed to purchasing grapes. And, once you've made that commitment, you realize that you don't really long-term own that land. You're really just a custodian, and you're going to pass it on to the next generation. And if that is your view, you are going to do everything that you can to ensure that you pass it on in better condition than you received it, and in a condition that they will be able to benefit from. So you automatically tend to go towards gentler practices. You shy away from chemicals, both fertilizers and sprays. You try and be as natural as possible in terms of organic composting and nutrients. Pest control, you try to get that as organic as possible. On that side, we use ducks, wasps, hands, humans, whatever we can. So it's really just about, we are not organic. no one's succeeded yet in the Hemel-en-Aarde in farming 100% organic.
Too wet?
Too wet, yeah. It's a very marginal area here. It's cold and wet. And because the ocean is right next to us, we can often get quite a lot of humidity, which, when you get those days with high humidity, it's you can sometimes hear our French intern told us that they say in French that you can hear the botrytis dancing on the skins of the grapes.
That's not French, good, is it?
Yeah. So
bloody French.
Yeah, occasionally we do need to be more aggressive, but the bottom line is farming is we take a very holistic approach. And do the best that we can to keep it in the soils in great nick. Super important for us.
And how many hectares do you have now? Because when you bought it, there was Cabernet and Chardonnay on the property, but you've since planted Pinot and more vineyards, haven't you? Quite a bit more vineyards.
We've continued to develop the property. So we initially had about 4 hectares, roughly 2 hectares Chardonnay, 2 hectares of Cabernet. I still have most of those vineyards. I pulled out one small portion of the Cabernet. It started picking up some leaf roll virus, and I wasn't prepared to farm with virus. So we pulled that out. And I've continued planting as much as I can. And we're now at 21 hectares. So,
and what were you when you bought it?
4.
Yeah. Okay, good. You've expanded a lot, haven't you?
Yeah. Look, it's been a huge, especially from 2018, we embarked on a 4-year planting regime to plant. So we really upped the hectarage at that stage. But I had planted in 13 and then again in 17. So it's been a very important part of our development on the property is the vineyards.
Yeah.
We're in the state. We're actually only making wine, particularly now. We used to buy a bit of fruit now and again, but at this point in time, we've recently been registered as an estate, and we only make wine from the grapes that we grow.
I mean, you grow Pinot and Chardonnay, and we've talked about this already, which are par for the course, and the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, they're probably the kind of signature grapes, really. But as we've said, Cabernet Sauvignon, I mean, it's still there. You've made this amazing wine from it. You clearly like a challenge, don't you? I mean, how do the 3 varieties differ in the vineyard and the cellar? I mean, obviously, picking dates are very different for a start, aren't they?
Yeah. Look, first of all, they're on different sites. So that plays quite a significant difference. For example, the Cabernet is on the warmer sites, north facing. It's quite challenging, of course, to do Cabernet in the Hemel-en-Aarde, but not as challenging as one might think. We have learnt a lot over the years, and we've learnt particularly how to farm Cabernet. I've been the sort of lone pioneer of Cabernet in the Hemel-en-Aarde for 21 years. We've figured quite a lot out. And so our vineyard management has been honed over the years to deal with a late ripening grape in a relatively cool area. So that, each Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Cabernet, they each have their own viticultural requirements, but all starting off with site selection and putting the right grape in the right place, and then managing each varietal differently. And we actually have very different regimes with each cultivar. And it's not just canopy management, but pruning and actually soil management, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, you didn't quit your day job, did you, until 2018? So by then, Restless River was doing pretty well. It, had a name for itself, and people knew about you and about the wines you're making, right?
Yeah, some people. I think we've still got a lot of work to do in that regard, but we had certainly broken out into the international arena. It was ironically our Cabernet Sauvignon, which was the first wine that put us into the spotlight. So that it is 2018. I felt comfortable that I could quit my day job, and that the wine side would actually be able to carry us through and support us as a family. Obviously a big decision to make, but it was a necessary decision.
I just wondered how significant climate change is in your region? I mean, as you've said, it's a marginal region. It's a cool climate region. Is it getting easier with climate change to ripen Cabernet Sauvignon on a regular basis to the degree you want?
I think in some ways we're a little bit like Burgundy, where things have got a bit easier for them of late. So definitely it assists us. Obviously, when you get extreme weather, that's a different situation. But if you look at it on an average, we are a very wet, very cool area. So when we had the 4 years of drought, for example, in the Cape from 2015 to 2018, we loved it out here. It was a lot drier, a lot less disease pressure. The ripening, everything. It was a fun time for us. So climate change, I think we can quite safely say that for the foreseeable future, we're in a good space. I think we're very, very well positioned for what may come. And if it is a bit more heat and a little bit less rain, we're good for that. And particularly on the Cabernet side. I think no one in the Hemel-en-Aarde is particularly concerned at this stage about climate change or global warming,
side of climate,
whatever you want to call it.
That side of it, yeah. I mean, you mentioned this thing saying that there's still a lot of work to do. I mean, is there still a degree of cultural cringe when South Africans compare themselves with other countries? I mean, especially in a Pinot and Chardonnay region where they're comparing themselves with Burgundy. I mean, I kind of think South Africa doesn't get the recognition it deserves. I mean, is that true?
I think it used to be true. I think that to start with the first part of that question, the cringe, the cultural cringe side. Incidentally, that's a phrase that I only very first heard from you. So I would
say
that's a Tim Atkin line. You know, we have a few phrases that we all hold on to. The last one was a white capital monopoly, which came from some PR company in England. But anyway, I like the cultural cringe phrase. But I think we did suffer from that. But so much has changed. We've all moved on a lot in the last 20 years. And certainly amongst my peers and the guys I travel with and the wines that I drink locally, we very much hold our own in any international environment. And certainly Chardonnay, Pinot Noir from this area competes really well internationally and punches way above its weight. And I think it is gathering recognition for that. And as you look at prices in other countries for Pinots and Chardonnays, so are we being recognized even more and more for great quality at a not necessarily a low price, but just at a sane price, not insane.
Same price. I think you're right. Yeah. I like that. I mean, you're famous for doing these sort of overseas fact-finding missions. I mean, they're kind of vineyard missions usually, aren't they? I just wonder, where do you go? I know you go to Burgundy, but are there other places you go for? I wonder what you're looking for when you go.
I love to see how people do things. And I think both from a vineyard perspective and from a wine perspective, it's really important not to try and operate inside a vacuum. It's a good old cliche that you can't make great wine if you don't know what it tastes like. But it's most cliches are based on truth. And both from a vineyard side, viticultural side, I like to travel. Spain, States recently, Italy, France, different areas in France too. The next is going to be, I think, Germany and Austria. I just really enjoy seeing what other good farmers are up to and having conversations with them. A lot of the European guys from cooler regions are very interested in what we do in South Africa because global warming is on their mind. It's actually quite nice from my perspective to chat to guys who are in cooler regions to see how they manage more difficult, wetter years. So it's great to get out there and just to meet new guys, to network and to see what everybody's up to and to taste wines. It's a really important thing, I feel.
I think that's true. Is there any way you'd like to do a joint venture or make wine yourself overseas?
I don't know. We'll see how things go with South Africa. We might be forced to at some point, but hopefully not.
Let's hope not.
At this stage, I'm really loving what we're doing here, and it demands. If you're going to lock in and give it 100% of your attention, which I think if you want to be good at something, you need to really focus. And at this stage, my focus is here. I don't have a desire to go and do something somewhere else. And just the energy and the time is needed here, and I'm loving it here. So I don't think I'll be heading off anywhere short.
I wanted to ask you, is there something you wish you'd known in 2004 when you bought your first farm that you know now? Is there one thing you thought, God, I wish I'd known that?
Other way around. Thank God there's things I didn't know, because if I knew what I was, the hornet's nest I was stepping into, I don't think I might not have done it. So rather than I'm glad I didn't know those things. It's a crazy business. It's all consuming. It's a black hole. It's basically a non-profit organization, and it requires a lot from you, particularly if you're both farming and making wine. So I think it's just as well I didn't know a lot 20 years ago.
But it's as much fun as advertising it at its best, isn't it? We have a good time.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, at least both the wine industry and the advertising industry have mind-altering substances involved, which certainly helps.
I won't ask you about the advertising.
That's a great industry to be in.
Yeah. Final question is, how do you get away from wine? Now, I know you're a big surfer. I mean, lots of South African winemakers are huge surfers, aren't you? Evan, Duncan, lots of people. One of the Schultzes, all of the Schultzes, at least one of the Schultzes.
Three of them.
Is that your biggest passion away from wine? I mean, your family, obviously, you've got a very great and very close family.
Yes, I mean, surfing it's good to have an activity, a physical activity outside of your day job. I really think of it as a religion. I think it's the one thing I would pray to, maybe to the surf gods. But it plays a very big role. In fact, such a big role. I've never lived, I'm almost an old man, and I've never ever lived more than 20 minutes from the ocean. It's a big part of our life, and surfing plays a big role in it. But I'm also a petrol head, where I from a very young age very into the internal combustion engine. So anything that had an engine, I was in love with. And a lot of motorcycles, and currently for the last 30, 40 years, I've been into old cars, classic cars, muscle cars, restore them. And then I have quite a thing for speed. So I take them racing, and we see how fast we can go.
I race cars.
I guess I've still got that old Harley. Yeah, I bought that Harley in 1992. I still have it. I'm also quite sentimental, quite traditional too. I've obviously had many, many bikes since then, but still have that old original one, which is quite cool. My son rides it around. So, the next generation's on it.
It sounds brilliant. And the next generation's
that motorcycle did nearly remove me from the face of this earth a few times. So try not to encourage Luke to ride it too much.
Well, I'm very glad it didn't. And I think anybody who enjoys your wines from Restless River will be very glad it didn't remove you from the earth as well. Stay safe, keep surfing, having fun. Great to talk to you. And I'll see you very soon in South Africa, I hope.
Likewise, Tim. Thanks so much. Have a great evening.
What a great story. Craig's success shows what you can achieve with intuition, perseverance, and raw talent, provided you got great vineyards. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is the Portugal-based wine writer and singer Charles Metcalfe. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @timatkin and on Instagram @timatkinmw. See you next week.